remember sitting on this particular deck with the mother of a student we taught music to, who was complaining about someone that she knew with bipolar, and a lot of it was based on myths, you know, and I'm frightened of him and I don't want him to spend any time with my kids, and then at one moment I said to her, "No, that's really interesting that you say that you're worried about that, because I have bipolar." And she went, "No, you don't." I said, "Well, actually I do, you know, I have a diagnosis of bipolar, you know." And she said, "No, you don't." I said, "I'm not going to argue with you, but it's true. I have a diagnosis of bipolar disorder." And she said, "But you're normal." It's like, oh, duh. Good evening, sir.
Oh, good evening.
You're nuts.
Oh, thank you. I didn't think you'd know.
Tammy Allen is one of 6 New Zealanders you are going to meet who have faced the stigma and discrimination that exists for people living with a mental illness in our communities. Their unique experiences of living with mental distress have given them the qualifications to work in the mental health field. Tammy, who now works as a mental health educator, is a woman of a million jobs.
Apart from a wife and a mother, I've been an actor full-time, part-time and professionally for the last 20 years. I've been a chef and caterer. I've been an international flight attendant. I was Australia's first female butler at the age of 18. I'd travel around looking after the Rolling Stones or Michael Jackson or all these wonderful things, and that was great. It was fabulous, a good time.
Tammy's fellow tutor Miriam Barr is a poet and publisher with an MA Honours in psychology.
The future is probably looking quite good and quite full on, because I've just finished all of sort of the academic part of my studies at the end of last year, and I'm just looking for somewhere to do my internship.
Paul Witherspoon is a musician, photographer, ex-recording studio owner and a former volunteer firefighter.
So I was the guy that went blatting down the road with the lights and sirens going and was responsible for a crew, and I jumped out of this machine. The people that were waiting for us, we were the best things they'd ever seen in their lives, you know.
Jason Haitana is a journalism student and health services consultant who's finishing his MA Honours.
My thesis is around water and the environment and sustainability, and I'm really stoked about that. I have mentioned and talked to a lot of people though about the possibility of doing a PhD in Pacific development. I feel so connected to the ocean. I love the ocean. At the end of the day, the whole study thing has just been one thing after another. I've grown hugely from that.
Hine Hawke is a social worker and a mother of 2 young tamariki.
Kia ora!
Kia ora, mama.
I've got a lovely little girl, Miriana. She turns 6 in 2 weeks' time. And my baby is 3 years old, who's a monkey who drives me crazy. His name is Panapa. I've got a really great, loving, supportive husband, Regan, who's living here in Auckland while we're based in Rotorua.
All 5 are high achievers, well-educated, intelligent, normal law-abiding citizens, not an axe murderer among them. But all have something not normally spoken about in polite society, as this group of Unitec social work students is about to find out.
So that's where Miriam and I come in, because we're nuts. Diagnosed absolutely crazy sick.
Although she can laugh about it now, Tammy suffered in silence with a mental illness for years.
Things were very bad for a very long time. The rage, the depression, the feelings of just not wanting to be here, really. My first recollection of things going wrong was at high school, and I think I probably would have been 14 or 15, you know, when all the puberty genes kick in. I remember going to this fit of rage at a friend of mine at school because he had, it seems so ridiculous now, he'd stolen a Mars bar out of another friend's lunchbox and shoved it in his mouth, you know, as kids do. It's my Mars bar now. And I just, the unfairness of that.
Well, I'm from the far north and was raised by 2 wonderful hippies in the forest basically. We lived on a sort of 250 acres of just untouched forest, and we had like windmills and generators for power that my dad had built and all of that kind of stuff. My parents split up just before I was 6 years old, and so I ended up sort of moving around the area with my mum quite a bit. I got bullied quite a lot at school. The only thing I really ever struggled with throughout my schooling was maths and also PE. That would often be like a cause for that bullying to start.
For some who have experienced mental distress, there are obvious childhood triggers. For others, it came out of nowhere.
I was born and raised in darkest Liverpool in the early 50s. It was still going through a post-war period. So growing up in that environment, it was certainly pretty much what you see is what you get.
Paul first experienced hallucinations when he was only 9 years old.
And it's one of those events that I can actually remember in incredible detail. I was sitting out in the garden and the birds were talking to me. So it seemed quite normal to me to be sitting there talking to the birds. Right. Then the bird said to me specifically, don't go into the coal shed. But of course I did. I got up and I opened the coal house door and there was the biggest, hugest black spider on the back of the door. I mean, it's got to be yay big. Of course, I freaked out and I screamed, and my mum came running out into the garden. And I told her what I'd seen. Of course, I never told anybody else again for a very long time about anything I saw during episodes of psychosis, because I got a good hiding for making up stories.
I had the picture-perfect, idyllic childhood. I had mum and dad both worked. Our life revolved around school, sport and the church.
Hene's first experiences of mental illness began in her teens.
I remember starting to feel strange. I stopped talking as much. I stopped being around my friends. In my first form year, the world just turned upside down and it literally fell apart for me, and I didn't know what was wrong.
For a long time, this was about 10 years old, I've had an absolute fear. A fear of being hurt, a fear of being assaulted, a fear really of a strange sort of nebulous sort of thing that prevented me from doing a lot of things that other normal type of people could have done.
For Jason, his mental distress worsened in his mid-20s.
I had broken up with a girlfriend of mine. My life wasn't on track. One night, it just snapped, and that's when I started hearing voices. Because we were that close to the beach here, I could escape for a bit and go on these mad little pilgrimages and spread the news that, you know, I was Jesus. I decided to jump off into Tangaroa, into the sea, with my clothes on. They'd come out of the water and I'd come up to this lady who was reading this book. And I said to her, you know, I'm Jesus, what are you reading? She goes, I'm reading the Bible. And I go, well, you know, you're reading about me. And she took off, she ran away. I thought to myself at the time that she'd gone off to tell everybody about me being here. Unfortunately, in hindsight, it might have been a little bit different.
Tammy began to feel the effects of mental illness as a student.
I was always, you know, president of this committee. And then I guess when I went to university and I studied chefing and hospitality and business, and just took on far too much. The first time I ended up in hospital was around that time where I realised I don't want to get an F on my paper, but I've taken on too much. There's no way I can learn enough to get a distinction in this short period of time. So I'd rather be dead.
The suicide attempts were never really very planned, but they were always this little door that I would have in my head of if it gets too bad, I'll be able to do that, and it'll be okay, and it would be something that would help me kind of cope when I was feeling really terrible.
I remember one particular time my mother screaming at me to get up out of bed and go to school, and I was just so terrified and I couldn't, so she went and got my father. So up I went, I had a shower and got on the bus to school, hopped off and then jumped on the same bus to come home again. And not long after that, my mother took me to the doctors. at the end of it, he called Mum back in and he said, I think your daughter's depressed.
It would just be, you're just attention seeking, and I'd get just kind of shoved in a room by myself and made to wait there for, you know, maybe 12 hours, and a psychiatric registrar would come and talk to me, and I would say, oh no, I didn't mean it. And they'd go, okay, see ya. And they just let me leave, and I had to walk home. And I had amnesia for like 3 days, and I just walked home down Cairo, and I was still full of these sedatives that I'd taken. Anything could have happened, but they just didn't really care.
I call it the whatever stage. You know, you end up, these compulsions that you could rationally before go, I can't think like that. Suddenly it didn't matter that you thought like that.
And when it comes to crazy, you can't get more out there than believing you're the big guy.
There also is a group of people that we're proud to call ourselves part of the Jesus Club. Now, the Jesus Club isn't any fundamentalist group, it's actually a group of people that have thought that they were Jesus at one point in life.
And we sat together for the first time. Somebody said, well, I'm Jesus. The upshot of that was we decided we were all Jesus. So we spent about an hour and a half, I think, debating who was really. I mean, 2 people had to be wrong, right? So we formed the Jesus Club at that time.
It's not really something you can join. You know, like for instance, if you decide to join up with the club, yeah, go for it. But you have to actually have been a Messiah figure before you can join. Unfortunately, that's just the way it is.
But the Jesus Club is very much alive, and it stands for so much. But it was such a significant event for us. I mean, to actually laugh, to feel that relief that comes from being amused by somebody else's history, because it's so similar to our own.